Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jennifer Spots and Kelly McCoy from Global Family Travels, and Kelly's going to lead us in how to plan a meaningful family safari in the era of COVID. I'm going to share my screen here. Oops. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, all right. Well, Kelly, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, well, so today we're going to spend time sharing three things. First, a little bit about the continent of Africa and a very brief history, abbreviated history of safari. And then how to plan a meaningful safari in light of COVID-19. There's a couple of things that have changed about everything about travel. And then what I'd like to do is share a high-level overview of each of our meaningful itineraries that cover Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Tanzania. But before I do that, Jennifer, do you want to share a little bit about Global Family Travels?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. Global Family Travels is actually almost 11-year-old company based in Bellevue, Washington, and we basically put together immersive experiences and partnerships with nonprofit organizations or community organizations, and our travel pillars are to learn, serve, and immerse. So when you travel, you learn so much. You learn about the destination, you learn a lot of times about yourself because you're out of your comfort zone. And then you learn about some of the community challenges because we're engaging with the locals. And then because we are innately connected to many communities, we do have sometimes a service project in partnership with the community. It's community driven. And then because of that it's a very immersive experience. So Kelly will share more about those immersive experiences in Africa, but outside of Africa, we work in a couple of destinations in South America, as well as in Bali and also in Seattle area, Seattle, Washington.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So what I'd like to first do is, Jen, have you been to Africa before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so the one thing I like to do is always, Africa sometimes is a mystery for some people, and there's a lot of myths about Africa. So what I'd like to do is just demystify some of those things. But first, if you look at the map in the center, it shows the 7 different areas of Africa, from the light green at the top of North Africa, which includes Algeria and Egypt, etc. And then in the middle, the sage is the Sahel, which is the desert, dry and arid region of Africa. And then right below that in the emerald green is West Africa, which is known for its beaches, forests, and grasslands. Then we go to Central Africa and the lavender, which is mountainous, also forests and grasslands. The red area next to that going to the east is East Africa, which is where one of our itineraries are at that we're going to talk about later. And then down below in the gold, which 2 of our itineraries are based, are in Southern Africa, which includes the country of South Africa as well. And so based off of that, a lot of people, when they talk about Africa, they talk about Africa as if it's a country when it's actually the 2nd largest continent in the world. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how large it actually is. So Africa is 11 million square miles. And within that, we could fit the United States, all of Europe, Japan, China, and India simultaneously in those square miles. So that's just how big Africa really is. And that there's a huge amount of diversity. There's over 2,000 different, also over 3,000 distinct ethnic groups within the continent. And to give you an example of just the diversity of people, this image is from National Geographic in 2017, I want to say. And it just shows actually only 5 of the 3,000 or the 2,000 different language groups. Starting at the top of the young boy at the top is from the Khoisan people, which are some of the original people on the indigenous people on the continent. And then if you travel the spread all the way down to the bottom right, this young lady is Turkana-speaking young lady from Kenya. And when you look at all the different bone structures and skin tones, I know when I look at this picture, I see a lot of my family and all the different makeup that's there. And so from this, which one of the myths about Africa is that all of our human origins are originally from the continent. And so from that picture, you get this picture. And this image was also from that same issue of National Geographic. It's a project that was by an artist named Angelica Bass, and she just took Pantones of all the different skin tones, and you can see all different types of people that one may call themselves Black and someone else may call themselves white, but their skin tones might be very close together. So this just kind of shows how our shared humanity comes from the origins of the continent of Africa. Next slide, Jennifer, please. So a little bit about the, and Jennifer, if you hit enter again, I think. This is just the beginnings of the history of safari. And so the term safari comes from the Arabic verb safar, which means to make a journey. And the Swahili translation of that is journey. And in the beginning, during the 7th century, African and Arab peoples, safaris were used for trading, and that was everything from metals and wood and spices, and unfortunately people as well. And the map on the right-hand side here shows all the different trade routes throughout the continent of Africa and the Arabia Peninsula, from down in the south to West Africa. Many of the tribes on the continent of Africa are actually very nomadic tribes. And once you go on safari and you start hearing languages and you start seeing people and you start learning the history of those people, you'll know that some of the tribes started originally from West Africa, traveled down to South Africa, up through East Africa, and back around. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So during the 20th century, the modern safari was actually really born, and that came out of more of a spirit of adventure. Most of the adventures in Africa were marked by great discoveries and new species to Europeans who came through colonialism and Americans who came from sport. A lot of those new species of plants and animals and birds were documented, and unfortunately, along with the fun of safari became known as the big hunt. And with these naturalist men of science came all the hunters, and too often the safari became associated with the hunt, that is conquering the big attainable wild beasts and returning from the hunt with trophies. East African hunting safaris became fashionable pursuit among members of privileged classes in Europe and America. And although safari was now conducted in the name of science, it was as much a political and social event as it was a hunting excursion. And the era eventually evolved into what we know today as a conservation movement. And for example, Theodore Roosevelt, like many of the big hunters, really enjoyed it. And you can see, if you ever go to his home in Sagamore Hill in New York, you'll see some of the trophies, so to speak, that he hunted in Africa. But through this process, he also became a conservationist. And in his book, The African Game Trails, he condemns hunting as butchery and objectionable as any form of cruelty and barbarity. And through his work realizing while he was hunting and kind of capturing species actually to show in different museums like the Natural History Museum in New York City, that he had a desire to start protecting species. And he, like when he started the national parks here in the US, he was also very instrumental in helping the British during the colonial era to help put aside land in East Africa. And so, for example, Tanzania, as a government today, is one in the world where a third of their land is reserved for wild spaces and naturalization. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Thank you. And you have to press again. So today, the modern safari is far from what it used to be. And it's really today, visitors are now participating and connecting with local people and their culture, along with wildlife viewing of the Africa savannas, forest, rivers, lakes, and capturing memories with cameras and mounting those things on the walls as opposed to actual animals. Safaris are legendary for being a transformational family adventure, one that provides unforgettable exposure to the great outdoors and to wildlife. And few travelers realize, however, that the decision to book an African safari has likely never been more meaningful or important today. While there's been a steady stream of news over the past year about how nature has recovered amid global tourism, the global tourism shutdown, there's also a less cheerful side to the story. And when tourism disappears in places where the entire economic system is relied upon through tourism, and those dollars fund conservation efforts, not to mention jobs and helping people keep food on their tables and shelter. And so that's why safaris are very important, in fact, people getting back to these places to help support those communities. Next picture. So with that, one thing to think about for safari is just like we have all the great outdoor space here in Washington, most of the places in Africa that are great to go are open and welcoming visitors, and safaris are naturally, innately outdoors and socially distanced, which is why it makes a great way to travel, especially with a family. So with that, I want to share 10 different things to think about planning a meaningful safari. Next slide, please. And the first one of those, and if you hit enter again, then I'll let it, thank you. One more time. And one more, I think. There we go. The first thing is using a travel advisor. And so whether you want to travel in the next few months or the next year, what we can help you with is navigate the added safety nuances and protocols and all the logistics of getting to all the different countries. As you may know, with COVID happening, borders are opening and closing, and all of the rules and regulations are fluid and constantly changing. A great example of that is South Africa. They were one of the first countries in Africa to reopen, and then they had a surge, and then they closed, and then they were able to reopen again. And so we watch and work with our partners and touch base every couple of days to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information for you. And so helping to navigate that will help to kind of make the planning of a safari much easier, as well as we can guide you on the insurance, which is very important these days. We always advise to have travel insurance, but it's even so much more important now with COVID-19. The second thing you'll want to do is really kind of to think about a plan and pick your safari destination. So the one thing, I'm still on the last slide. Sorry, Jennifer. So you want to think about the whole of Africa, and some of the safest places to go are in safari destinations. And so where we focus really is South Africa, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And each of those countries have different rules and regulations with safari, as well as I mentioned, entry and exit permits and COVID testings. The one thing to definitely consider is the length of your safari, because of any trip, regardless of where you go, you do have to have 72 hours to get a COVID test before taking a plane back into the United States. And that is a US rule. So those are the things to think about. The one thing in thinking about a destination is really thinking about the time of year you want to go and what you want to see. I've been traveling to Africa for the last 18 years and have traveled in about 7 different countries. And people always ask me, am I tired of going on safari? And my answer is always no, because you see different things at different times of year, and different countries have different types of animals and species and that thing. So for example, South Africa, you can pretty much go there almost year round, because it's very similar to our southern climate in the southern, like, Florida, California, etc. Whereas East Africa, which is Tanzania and like Kenya, have definite rainy seasons, and those are usually the wettest time of year is usually March and April, and the driest times of year are technically our winter, so like December, November, December, etc. Summer times are great in both places. And Zimbabwe is very similar to South Africa as far as climate, because it's still part of Southern Africa. And so those are things to really think about as well too. And if you love birding, I'm a bird nerd myself. So December is a great time to go to Africa, because all of the birds migrate south and end up in Africa. So whether there's things that you see here in North America or things you've never seen, the beautiful colors of birds in the Southern hemisphere, it's a great place to go to do that time of the year. So it's really kind of thinking about those things. And again, using a travel advisor helps you know that if you're not familiar with those things. And the third thing to consider is really the age of the safari, your family, and how many people are going. So for example, we just were working with a multi-generational family that had grandparents and then 3 boys, and the youngest was 8. And so safari is great for anyone child that's 6 and up, because we feel like they can really appreciate the space and the time and the connection and understand the different cultures. Whereas younger children that are toddlers can't. So that's a different experience. So that's one thing to think about, and think about what the interests are of each of those. So if the kids like sports, we have the opportunity to kind of arrange different activities that are kind of sports driven, as well as if you want to hike or if you want to ride horses. There's different activities in different countries. And so we really try to curate an experience that kind of helps to serve all the interests of the group. There's a lot of driving and walking that happens on safari. So that's also something to think about in regards to age of the travelers as well in your family. Okay, next slide, please. You'll have to hit that a couple of times. And the one thing to really think about now, usually when in the past, when people plan safaris, they want to think about how many countries can they get to. And because the way countries are situated, so for example, Zimbabwe is a good example. Some people who go to Zimbabwe also want to go to Botswana. They also want to go to South Africa. And while that's a great idea, it's a lot on a family if it's a big family that's going in different ages, because there's a lot of road transfers and things like that. But now is a great time to really think about maybe just seeing one country at a time and kind of taking it slow and really immersing in that country. And because safari is definitely not an experience that you want to rush. And depending on where you're traveling from, and let's say we're traveling from Washington, it's at least a 24-hour flight with changes in time and layovers and whatnot. So really allowing yourself the time to take it slow and kind of connect and kind of ease your way into the trip is really, really important. And we really suggest that no less than 2 weeks if you're going to go on safari. I've tried to do a safari in a week and it was exhausting. And so I would advise against that. And I was just traveling with other adults. And so I can only imagine what it would be like to travel with kids and do that in a week. It would be very rushed and it's hard on your body. The other thing to think about is, like I mentioned, when do you want to go and what do you want to see? And that can also help define like how long to stay and et cetera. And so what we're been advising people as far as timing of thinking about when to go on a safari in Africa, we are constantly watching. All of our countries are open, but we're saying like later 2021 and beyond is a great time. And right now we're in the midst of working on tweaking some of our itineraries for 2022. So go slow and keep it simple. The next thing is really considering, again, the abilities and interests of each family member. So what generally happens on safari is there's always an early morning safari drive. There's usually a late afternoon safari drive, an early evening safari drive. And depending on what country you're in, there's off-road game drives, meaning that the safari jeep can go off of the actual road. That won't happen in Tanzania, but it does happen in South Africa. And so Again, if you're usually in South Africa, there's age restrictions, so there's probably not going to be off-road game drives for if you have a child that's a toddler. We have had a family take a toddler, and they had we curated a different experience for them. So that's something to think about. There's also bushwalks that are on safari that can take up to an hour to 2 hours, depending on what's happening in the bush. And there's also opportunities to do a self-drive, like in South Africa. That is something that can be arranged. So just really thinking about all those different activities and likes that your family's interested in. And then the other thing is really looking for cultural experiences to engage with and support the local communities. A lot of, what a lot of people don't realize is most people who live around national parks in Africa, different countries in Africa, sometimes have never even stepped into that park because they usually haven't had the access to the park. We work with partners that actually give access to communities that live around and support the economy around the national parks. And one example here is in Wenge National Park in Zimbabwe. This is Mr. and Mrs. Nkube, and they are kind of like the mayors of their homestead area. And so they work with the different members of the communities, and they tell our partner on the ground when it's okay for tourists to come and see and spend time with them and to learn about their culture and their day-to-day life. And that's a really unique experience that you don't get on a lot of safaris. But our partner on the ground takes the time to make sure that the community around Wenge National Park is really involved in the economy of tourism in that park. And they have a say of what the lodges look like. They have a say as to what activities happen, when and where things happen, versus someone coming in and say, hey, we can do this for you and we want to do it our way. And so we're very sensitive to that. But one of our best experiences is really spending a day with and watching kids interact with kids at the Ngamo School, which is right outside of the southern part of Wenge National Park in Zimbabwe. And so really important to think about those things. And each of our itineraries has different experiences and opportunities to do that and connect with the local people and really see an authentic day in the life versus kind of the Disney version of what that's supposed to look like. So now next slide, please. So then one big thing is making sure that the safari you take supports wildlife conservation and, again, the local people. And again, tourism in general has really been impacted by the pandemic. And a good example of how COVID-19 has impacted conservation, during the first couple of months, there has been, in like Botswana, it happened, and parts of South Africa where rhinos were beginning to be poached again. And usually what happens with tourism, it helps to give jobs. And so it helps to eliminate some of those, some of the need for having bushmeat on tables and really making money from the ivory from rhino horns that are a big demand in China. So the tourism industry on the entire continent is almost $40 million. And a lot of that helps to fund jobs as well as conservation programs. And a lot of the fees that you pay as a tourist when you go back to conservation and helping to maintain those parks. And like I said, for example, in Tanzania, a third of the entire landmass is national parks. And so imagine the impact that has. And so what we do when we work with our partners on the ground, and depending on what the different programs are, there's generally a conservation element in each of our itineraries. So for example, in South Africa, some of the fees go back to planting trees. In Zimbabwe, it goes directly back to the community that surrounds Wenge National Park. In Tanzania, it helps with funding of a school in Karatu, the library in Karatu. So the other thing to consider is flexibility. If there's one thing that has been a silver lining through COVID in this first 18 months of the pandemic is most travel companies and airlines have had more flexible terms and conditions. And so that's one thing that we can also help guide you on when you're making your choice for insurance and airfare and et cetera. And again, buying travel insurance, really important. The one thing that we kind of lived through the beginning of 2020 was helping people get back from trips back into the US in time. And if they had insurance, it was a lot easier versus if they didn't have insurance, et cetera. So just really making sure that you have trip protection and travel insurance, and we can help guide with that because different families have different needs. And then just traveling with safety in mind is the biggest thing. I think one of the safety has always been a priority for us as Global Family Travels. And what we have adopted is guidance from the World Health Organization as well as the CDC. And we have taken some of the same guidance that the Adventure Travel Association has laid out. And that those are our new protocols. And we can share those with you. And we also have the same expectations for our partners on the ground in the destinations that we serve. And so kind of some main tips, and there's a few more that I'll share on the next slide, things to consider. And these are kind of things that you would consider anytime you take a safari, regardless of what's happening with pandemics in the world. So the one thing to keep in mind is sleeping arrangements. Generally, when there is a family with children, there has to be an adult with the children in a tent. So the children cannot sleep by themselves in a room, for example. The other thing to really think about is dietary requirements and meal times. And so what we always ask is if there's, if we need gluten-free, if there's vegetarian, but also if there's specific ways we can arrange for meal times if there's something that's out of the range of the basic breakfast, lunch and dinner. Transportation is really important to think about. Again, on safari, there could be a 4-hour trip from point to point within a game park or within multiple game parks. And so if there's someone that has car sickness or doesn't travel well by road, we can also arrange for inter-country flights from point to point. So that's also something to think about and consider. The one thing about roads in different countries is there's something called the African massage. And that's because the roads are a little bumpy, and that varies from country to country. And let's see, safety in wildlife settings is really important. If you have younger children, you want to kind of what I call head on a swivel all times, because in most of our tent situations, there aren't gates that keep the animals roam throughout the properties. And so that's why there's usually age restrictions on what can be done. But we always like to make sure if there's an older child and a younger child that there's multiple, heads on a swivel and people are keeping eyes on the younger kids. Most of our lodging accommodations do have swimming pools. And so that's another thing to keep in mind as well as far as safety goes. The biggest thing is you will get a safety briefing pretty much every day, depending on activities, and you'll definitely get them at the lodges that you're at. And for example, in most of our lodges, elephants do go throughout, especially at nighttime, animals are in and out of the accommodations, which is really cool. But at the same time, we want to keep everyone safe. So it's cool to kind of go out and what is that noise? Let's stay in the tent. let's stay in the tent and see. General health, water, and immunizations are things to think about. Pretty much every country in Africa will have some kind of shots that you'll need to get, depending on where you're going. We also guide you to work with your individual doctor to get that guidance. Obviously, COVID is going to be something that comes up. And so if you've gotten vaccinated, having your COVID card will be really important. Depending on where you're traveling in Africa, some countries require you to have a yellow fever certificate. It's similar to an immunization card, but that's a great place for you to keep track of all of your travel immunizations on the same card as well. And so we will work with you to share information from the CDC, but you'll also want to work with your doctor or a travel clinic to get the appropriate immunizations for your family. But in general, the vaccinations that are usually required are hepatitis A, hepatitis B, typhoid, malaria, and the MMR vaccination. And so those are kind of some key things to think about. And as far as documentation goes, passports will be up to date. Right now, just because I've experienced it, my passport was due to expire this year. And so I went on and sent it in, and I heard that there was going to be like a 12-week backlog. So I went on and got it expedited. Unfortunately, due with COVID, there's not really a place you can go for expedited passports as you used to be able to. And so you have to submit it. And I actually got it back within 3.5 weeks. So that was actually a nice surprise. So something just to make sure that that's up to date, and you have to have at least 3 months worth of blank like if you're traveling on a passport that's about to expire, it has to have at least 3 months on it for you to get into and out of a country, and you need to have enough pages available for visa stamps. So those are things that will help you be aware of once you're planning your trip. And this will probably also be evolving with COVID restrictions, and there's really talk about COVID passports, and every region of the world is different. Europe has a different app that they're working with. Africa is coming up with an app. The Africa Union is coming up with an app. So as we get closer to a family planning, we'll work with you and tell you kind of what the latest news is and what you need to be aware of. The one thing to think about in South Africa specifically, if you're traveling with a minor that is not your own, then they're or not biologically your own child, then you'll have to get paperwork for that. That actually is been changing 12 months with COVID. And there's specific rules in South Africa for that. So Jen, do you have any questions? I know I've covered a lot so far.
I think I mean, I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question or not, but I will have questions about accommodations and what that looks like. Like when you say kids can't sleep by themselves, are there age restrictions on that? And what kind of accommodations are we talking about? I think that was really the only thing that sort of came up. I'm just trying to look back at my notes.
Okay. Well, I can answer that. It's a great question.
Yeah. Can I recommend maybe since we're recording this, can we save the questions to the end and then
sure.
I'll cut the record. Yeah, thanks.
No problem. So, well, what I'll do now is I will share a little bit about our different itineraries, and then there's some images that you'll see, and we can also share about accommodations as we go along. So one of our really neat itineraries is called South Africa Cities and Safari. Jen, thank you. And that generally is 11 days and 10 nights. There is an optional add-on to Chobe National Park for additional 2 days and 2 nights. And we basically, you go to South Africa and there's so much to see, and it's such a great country. I mean, there is the plains and there's national parks, but there's also the different cities of Johannesburg and Cape Town that tell the true history of the country. And similar to our civil rights, Johannesburg is the heartbeat of the country. And that's where all the civil rights and justice work was happening during the apartheid era. And you'll find some other stories in Cape Town. But our itinerary starts off in Johannesburg, actually. And then we drive out to Kruger National Park, and there's some experiences there. And then you fly back to Cape Town and spend some time in Cape Town. And then again, if you want to add on Chobe National Park, you'll actually fly through Zimbabwe and then drive into Botswana. They're very close together. And what's great about South Africa, again, like I mentioned, you can travel there almost any time of year and you'll get great weather. We generally work around, because we are a family travel, we work around school breaks. So around spring break, summer break, and winter break, holidays. And technically, the dry season, as they call it in South Africa, is usually May through August and September. And I've been to South Africa about 2 or 3 times, and the weather has always been very similar to Seattle, but a lot sunnier. So in Cape Town, it's, a coastal town, so you'll have cool days where you'll layer your clothes. But then once you get out to Johannesburg and out to Kruger National Park, it's a tad bit warmer, but it's not unbearably hot. And that's what's great about South Africa. going May through September technically is dry season, but it's also in fact their low season. So pricing is really great, generally speaking. In July in South Africa is whale watching season. And August through September is technically their spring. So you'll start seeing all the flowers blooming, and then you'll start seeing all the animals are out in full force and having babies. So there's seeing. So that's kind of a high level idea of kind of timing and ideal times to go and things you'll see. And the next slide of South Africa, even within the country of South Africa, there's actually 2 more countries, Lesotho and Swaziland. And South Africa is surrounded by the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. There's Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique that are the countries that surround South Africa. And most of our time will be spent down in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, as well as up near Johannesburg and Mpumalanga, which is where Kruger National Park is, and Soweto and everything that's there. But this just gives you a different idea of what's in South Africa as far as the different areas. Next slide, please. So the learning themes on our unique to this tour is basically understanding the local lifestyles of South Africans from cities and areas called townships and the rural areas, the effects that apartheid had through firsthand experience of the people of District 6, which is in Cape Town, and the people of Soweto, which is in Johannesburg. You'll learn and appreciate the concept of Ubuntu, which basically means my humanity is caught up in your humanity and that we're all connected. And that actually originated in the country of South Africa. But that philosophy is all over the continent. And then you'll engage in the nuance and African culture. You'll also visit Robben Island, where anti-apartheid activists were held. And that day is really cool because it culminates with a dinner, either from an ex-prisoner of Robben Island or an ex-guard. So you actually sit down as a family and break bread with someone who lived the experience. And then finally, the other great experience is you'll be on safari and you'll get to know what the big 5 are and how to spot them out in the national parks. Next slide. This just gives you a sample of Soweto, and Soweto would be very similar to Atlanta or Memphis. Again, it is the heart of the heartbeat of the nation is what Johannesburg is called. And Soweto is one of the townships that you'll visit where Indigenous Blacks were made to live. They weren't allowed to live outside of Soweto in Johannesburg. And it's also where a lot of the gold mining companies were based, and a lot of the workers lived in different kind of housing. So you'll see that. You'll spend a day breaking bread with a family in Soweto. And the middle picture is some time that Jennifer and I had with a local family and some of their neighbors over lunch. We had a language lesson. We talked politics, which was very interesting. And it was multi-generational ages. So it was great to see people who were Jennifer and I's ages in their 50 calling younger people the born free people because they were born after apartheid. So it was very interesting and dynamic. And I felt like I was in my grandmother's house listening to conversations about the civil rights era. And so you'll get to visit the different museums that are in the area. This is the place where Nelson Mandela's home was after he was released from Robben Island. You'll see his home, it's now a museum. Around the corner from his home is also Archbishop Desmond Tutu's home. So you have 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners living in the same neighborhood at one point in time. And so Soweto is a very special experience. Next slide, please. And after Soweto, then we go on a road trip and we head out to Kruger National Park. But along the way, we have a couple of different stops into some really cool natural spaces. And one particular space is called Bert Luck's Potholes. And it's kind of the equivalent, I guess, to a smaller version of the Grand Canyon, where erosion has made all these really cool formations and things like that. And so this is a 4-hour drive from Johannesburg out to Kruger National Park. So there's several stops along the way. And the family would arrive in Kruger National Park in time for dinner. So a great time to kind of relax in your accommodations and lodging there. Accommodations in Johannesburg are actually at a Holiday Inn that's in Johannesburg, that's near an area that is known for art galleries and great restaurants. And it's a beautiful little neighborhood. When we get out to Kruger National Park, we stay at a lodge, and the lodge is built in the formation of houses that are known for the Ndebele tribe. And they're basically rondavel houses that have thatched roofs, but they all have private rooms and facilities and things like that. But on the property, monkeys kind of come in and out. In fact, the family that we just had there in 2019 actually saw, I forget if it was an elephant. I think it was an elephant that was coming through the property at dinner at night. So while they were having dinner. So all kinds of fun things to do there. In Kruger National Park, basically there are 2 days there, and there's 2 game drives, a morning and an afternoon, and there's 2 half days of community service. And again, we work with our partner on the ground to find out what does the community want to happen with this engagement, and also what do you and your family want to happen. So our family that was in South Africa last really wanted to do something with agro-tourism, learn about eco-farming. And so they actually got to work on a eco project with a farm that's just right outside of Kruger National Park. But there's also activities like educational and literacy activities. There's sports activities. So it's really kind of based on the needs of the community, and also what your desires are as a family, and kind of what the ages are and that make up the family, and kind of what you're interested in. So we can customize that. Let's see, the next slide, please. So after we spend time out in the Kruger National Park and Mpumalanga area, you and your family will fly down to Cape Town, and which is kind of like going from New York to Chicago. It's like a 2.5-hour, 3-hour flight. And basically, you'll be staying in an area actually in the bottom right-hand corner that is called Greenpoint. And that is actually a kind of bed and breakfast type of accommodation. And depending on availability, accommodations could change, but essentially it's a smaller hotel with a pool. And it's great, this great kind of walking neighborhood, community kind of neighborhood. But you'll spend time in different parts of Cape Town throughout your stay there. You'll actually spend time on a community, a township, and you'll actually have lunch. And also spend time in an area called Bokop, which is the Malaysian district, which is in the, change pictures. Well, it's in the right-hand side with the bright colors. And so the cool thing about South Africa is made up of, there's so much cultural diversity, mostly due to colonialism and then due to slavery. But within Cape Town itself, you have a Southeast Asian population, which is Malay. And so you'll learn how to cook a Malay dinner, and actually you'll cook your own dinner and break bread with a local Malaysian family. There's also time spent on the bicycle tour. There's a couple different museums that you'll be visiting, as well as going out to Robben Island. And then in Cape Town is where there's also the experience with the ex-prisoner or ex-guard from Robben Island as well. And then in Cape Town, there's 2.5 days of community service. And again, it can based off of, it's a different community group that we work with in Cape Town. It's based on the needs of the community as well as the desires of the family. And we already talked about the bicycle tour and dinner. And so next. And so after Cape Town, you will fly out of Cape Town International Airport to your home destination, or you will fly, you'll enjoy Chobe National Park in Botswana, and you'll fly through Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and then you'll have a road transfer into Chobe National Park in the Botswana area. And that is actually at a lodge that is on the Chobe River. So you'll see hippos and elephants, and there's really some cool mammals in that area. So that is South Africa. And these are just some samples of our partners that we work with locally in South Africa. And our next destination is Zimbabwe. And the experience here is really focused on conservation and community connection. This trip, we partner with the Painted Dog Research Trust, which is based in Zimbabwe, and Dr. Greg Rasmussen, who's a biologist who's been living there for about 28 years now. And he actually has brought back the species and helped protect the species of the painted dog, which is these cute little dogs with the huge ears. They're the one of the only canine species that actually take care of the young and the old. They don't leave any animals behind when someone is injured. It's a fascinating species, and they're really cute. But this trip is 10 days and 9 nights. And depending on the time of year, there's optional extensions. We basically suggest Zimbabwe 2 different seasons: green season, which is basically a slight rain, not heavy rain, and then there's the high seasons of summer. Green season usually happens in our March, April, and in the month of December. And summer basically is May through November. So this itinerary starts in Victoria Falls, then goes out to what's called the Batoka Gorge, which is not far from Victoria Falls, but it's along the Zambezi River. Then we go down into Wenge National Park and Zambezi National Park. And most of the drives are basically in 4-wheel. Road transfers are in minivans. And then once we get to national parks, you hop into a Jeep and you're in the open air, which is really cool. Next slide. And just to give you an idea, this is the entire country of Zimbabwe, and it's surrounded by South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, and it's kind of landlocked. The area that we're going to go to, next slide, is in the, so let's see, northwest, because it's opposite for me, northwest corner, and that is where Victoria Falls is, and Wenge National Park. This entire section in the green is kind of where we'll spend most of our time. Next slide, please. And so some of the key elements for this itinerary is really connecting with the different wildlife and ecosystem of Zimbabwe and the World Heritage Site, which is Victoria Falls, and the Zambezi River and the Batoka Gorge, and Wenge National Park and Zambezi National Park. You'll have an opportunity to learn about one of the most rare species it's one of the most endangered, more than elephants or lions, the painted dog. And then you'll also connect with the communities that surround Wenge National Park and Southern Wenge National Park, as well as Victoria Falls. And so the cool thing about Zimbabwe is when we talk about safaris, a lot of people go to Kruger National Park. That's probably one of the highest visitation rates in South Africa. The Serengeti in Tanzania would be second. And then Wenge would be third. And in Wenge, they get just about under 50,000 people a year visiting the park. So you really have the safari park kind of to yourself. It's one of the first places I've been where there wasn't certain times of day in national park. Sometimes it's a little like the 405. Actually had the one more to be out and just left them, and they're now on their own, but they sat on that track and just looked and looked and looked for her. And cheetahs generally have 4 babies at a time, and so it's kind of like these little bookends here on this train track. And in any other park, in this picture, you might see cars, so all safari cars kind of surrounding animals. And so we try to work with our partners to make sure, that doesn't happen in their space. But Wenge National Park is one of the parks where you literally can go without seeing another safari van for a while, which is really cool. Next slide. This is a picture of the Painted Dog Research Trust, and Dr. Rasmussen, Jennifer's there, and he had just picked us up from the airport. And this is one of his mobile labs where he actually goes out in the field, and he's been working on special collars for tracking the painted dogs. He's got a lot of cool stuff on his compound. In fact, he is actually building one of the first primary and secondary schools for biologists and conservation that are local to the area on his property. And from his property, you can actually even see the steam from Victoria Falls. So he's been invested quite a bit in the community that he's lived in and surrounds. And so he's a pretty unique guy and interesting to learn from. And so we are really excited to be able to support him. Next. And so the first night you will be staying at a place in 2021, we're still here at Batoka Gorge. And if you look at this image below, you'll see the Zambezi River. On the far right, there's a cliff and you see little dots on the cliff. Well, those are the accommodations, and those are really cool lodges that accommodate 4 to 5 people. There's different sizes for different families. But what's great is you get sunrise and sunset, and just across the way from you is Zambia, which is a whole different country. And you can hear the water rushing. This part of the Zambezi River isn't the really heavy part. Zambezi River is known for rafting. It's like a rated 8 if you love to raft and you love big splashing. It's one of the highest rated rivers in the world. And so this is a whole really interesting, beautiful area. There's actually eagles that have nest along the gorges there that fly past the room. And at certain times of day, there's actually an eagle feeding at the property as well. Next slide, please. This is just a shot of Victoria Falls. So within that, you have a private tour of Victoria Falls. And there's always controversy on which side is the better side to see the falls, Zambia or Zimbabwe. I've seen it twice and I say Zimbabwe. It's a little bit more lush on the Zimbabwe side. And when it's in full flood, it looks completely different than when it's not. And there's also an opportunity to take a evening river cruise at sunset along the Zambezi River. And from the Zimbabwe side, it's the first time I ever saw an animal in the wild in Africa, was on a river cruise and seeing elephants and alligators and kingfishers and all kinds of different bird life and things like that. So there's a little bit more activity on the Zimbabwe side of Victoria Falls. Next, please. And this is the safari type of safari vehicle. It's a stacked vehicle, so everyone has a great view. And based off of this kind of vehicle, this is harder to put like a child seat in. And so when we have a toddler that comes, then we'll have a different kind of vehicle that's safer with a child seat. And that's why there's different kind of age restrictions based off of different type of vehicles, if that makes any sense, because these are actually really elevated. Next. And these are just shots from the last time actually Jennifer and I were actually in Wenge National Park, which was a couple of years ago. The cool thing about this safari, which is, next slide, which is unusual, is, as I mentioned, there's a lot of driving on safaris. And what's cool about Zimbabwe is we actually have a rail car that's a safari that breaks up all the driving. And so you enter Wenge National Park from the north, and about a quarter of the way down, we stop in a city called Det, and we leave the vehicle and then we hop on a train, and there's food and facilities, and it's another 2 to 2.5 hours down to the southern part of the park. And you literally, this is not a mocked up picture. This is an elephant crossing behind and 2 lions crossing in front. And so you're like taking a train through the park, and you'll see all kinds, you'll see giraffes, you'll see baboons, you'll see all kinds of wildlife. So it's a really cool activity when you have kids, and if you have someone who's older, just its ability to kind of stretch your legs while you're kind of moving down the track. And we stop for different fun activities along the way for kids, but it's a really cool feature. In fact, our partner here actually now has a sleeper car in addition to this car. So there's 2 separate experiences that you could have with your family on this itinerary. And again, those beautiful cheetah, 2 male and 2 female, just waiting for mama, never came back. But there's a lot of great different experiences within Zimbabwe. The next one that Jennifer was going to, you can push now, is this sunken in kind of container that's opened up with a window. And it's really cool to take another lunch break, have lunch out in the bush, and then come down into this container and see all the elephants actually come to a watering hole. Next slide. Because it's really impressive when you're down below and you see how big these animals really are. And this was one afternoon, and it was technically the spring season. So there's all these male elephants as well as some baby male elephants all coming to the watering hole. And when we first got there, there was nothing. And then one came and then more came. And so it was just really kind of this interesting progression to see. And it literally, you really feel like you're part of the herd when you're in this experience. Next. So then another experience in Wenge National Park is literally picking up kids from their community and taking them to school. And whether they hop on the safari vehicle or you walk with them, but you really get a chance to connect with kids from primary to secondary age. There is something that we are working with the local soccer team in the community to have a soccer exchange. So there's different fun activities that happen throughout this day, but it's one whole day that's spent in the village and at the Ngamo Secondary School. Next. And then again, you'll get a tour of actual what a homestead looks like and what a day in the life looks like for the people in the community that live just outside of the park. Next. And this is what a walking safari essentially looks like. This section that we were in was called the Ngamo Plain. If you've seen a National Geographic or a Discovery Channel safari or expedition, you more than likely have seen it filmed. It was usually filmed in the Ngamo Plain. In the top left corner is what it looks like in green season. We happen to be there in dry season. And so the grass is a lot different. And there's some remains of an elephant that died naturally that you might walk by. And our guide is holding a tusk that was not, an animal that naturally died. And so you get to experience, again, kind of what it's like to be out there in the morning. This is probably like a 2 or 3 hour walking safari. Next.
Well, one thing you'll notice that the guide does have a gun, just in the event that there's an animal that we come across that, isn't too friendly. So.
It's mostly to scare the animal away. Yeah, and then to wrap up this, at the end of the safari, we go to another really cool experience called the Zambezi Sands, and it's in Zambezi National Park, which is back closer towards Victoria Falls. And this literally is on the most gentle part of the Zambezi River. And when you arrive, it's kind of like you've arrived in this oasis, and it's a great way to kind of end the trip and relax along the water and still do a safari, because you're actually going to do it in a raft, as well as there's 2 different kind of boats you can do. And there's all kinds of different experiences. And this literally, your room opens up to part of the river. So when you're in bed, you look out and you see the Zambezi River, and it's really calming and relaxing. And so to give you an example, when you go from room to room, the rooms are separated, but they're separated by boardwalks. And at nighttime, along this river, for example, you will get elephant, you'll get hippo, and you'll hear animals at night. And so usually if you need everything that you need is in your room, bathroom, sinks, everything. But if you wanted to, I don't know, go to the main room where the kitchen was, for some reason, a person would come to you with a flashlight, and they will also have a gun, like Jennifer mentioned, to kind of scare off an animal as you guys are walking, and you'll be guided back to along the boardwalk, back to the other, like main lodge area, let's say. So it's kind of pretty typical of most safari camps or safari lodges. Next slide. And next one. So our last experience in Africa is in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. And that generally is 9 days, 8 nights. There's also an additional optional add-on day and night in another national park called Tarangire National Park. It's one of my favorite places. This itinerary starts off landing in the Mount Kilimanjaro area at Kilimanjaro International Airport. And then we head out to Lake Manyara National Park. We visit Karatu, which is one of the last towns before you leave, and go out to the Ngorongoro crater, then out to the Serengeti. And we typically suggest this in the spring and summer, after the rainy season and before it gets too hot, closer towards the fall. Sometimes in December in Tanzania, and one of the places we go in Lake Natron, it gets very, very hot. So we suggest kind of spring and summer, especially if there's elementary school age kids, may not do as well in the hot, because it's hot and dusty out there. Next slide, please. So this gives you an example of Tanzania, and it's surrounded by the Indian Ocean, Mozambique to the south, and to the west is Zambia, Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda. At the top, Lake Victoria, which is equivalent to like Lake Michigan. And then just north, and kind of where we are closer to, is like near the border of Kenya. The Serengeti and the Masai Mara are actually the same plains. They're just called two different things in two different countries. So if you've heard of Masai Mara, it's the same kind of experience you can experience in the Serengeti. Next. So our learning themes unique to this tour is learning about wildlife in Tanzania. And so one great example, when people ask me, do I get tired of safari? So I'm a giraffe freak. I love giraffes. And giraffes in Tanzania look completely different than the giraffes in Zimbabwe, for example. And so you'll learn about the unique wildlife and ecosystem in Tanzania's national parks, as well as the cultural traditions of some of Tanzania's people, including the Maasai, which is one of the smallest tribes in the country, but one of the one that lives still very traditionally. You'll have a chance to witness the earliest signs of mankind at Oldupai Gorge, and visit the Ganaku Secondary School and learn about the impact of the Karatu Education Fund, which is one of our partners, and the impact they've had in the town. Next slide, please. And so this gives you an example of the circuit that will be going on from Mount Kilimanjaro out to the Serengeti on the left-hand side of the screen. And we'll be following this route. And you can see again how this big swath of Tanzania is all actual private protected lands, which is unique to this country. Again, a third of the country is preserved or in national parks. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we start off in Kilimanjaro, and then that is where you'll, in a good day, depending on the road that you're on, you can see actually the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, which is about 20,000 feet above sea level. And it's one of the last glaciers that's actually on the continent of Africa. And many people will go here and they will actually go climbing Kilimanjaro. There's 3 different routes to climb. Next slide. And then we'll head to Lake Manyara National Park. And this literally is tucked in the Rift Valley wall. And so the Rift Valley is a natural configuration that goes as far north as parts of Ethiopia and goes as far south as the top of South Africa. But you will see the bulk of the Rift Valley wall actually in Tanzania. And it looks, it's very green and lush. And you can see where the land has actually shifted and changed with the evolution of the earth. Next. After we visit Lake Manyara Park, we'll head out northeast to Lake Natron. And Lake Natron is known for the breeding ground for millions and millions of flamingos. And it is made of salt, and it's a salt and soda lake. And that's where the flamingos eat the minerals and they get their pink hue. The other place that we'll visit while in Natron is a Masai Boma, as well as the most recent discovery of some of the oldest footprints to be discovered were like in 2016 there. And the footprints are supposedly 120,000 years old. And so you can actually see them in the ground. And so there's an area that you'll be visiting through that, and you'll be walking through that. Next. And on day 4, you'll have the opportunity to actually visit a Masai Boma. And a boma is a small village that is made out of several different huts for different purposes. And the huts are made out of mud and sticks and cow dung. And this enables the nomadic Maasai people to quickly build and maintain and take down huts as needed as they roam through the country. But you'll be able to spend a day in the life of a Maasai family and learn how they, you might have an opportunity to work with a metalsmith. You might have an opportunity to see how the women make their beautiful jewelry or their collars and what all of the different beads mean. They all have a meaning. Next. After our time in Lake Natron, we will head out to Karatu, which is kind of a hub town. It's the last city on the way out to the plains. And you'll spend time at the Ganako Secondary School with where our partner, the Karatu Education Fund, has invested in building a library, and has one of the only librarians in the entire town is based out of this library at the Ganako Secondary School. And you'll spend time with the kids and learn what a day in the life of school is in Karatu. Next. And this is the inside of the recently finished library. There's also the Karatu Education Fund has also been able to supply scientific equipment for science classes to the school as well. Next slide, Jennifer, please. And during this time, you'll also be able to visit with Rima, the librarian, and some of the students. And depending if school is in or out, we can also arrange for an activity with the students from the community there. Next. After the visit to Karatu, we actually start heading out to the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, which includes the Ngorongoro crater. And in this area, this is a completely different, has a different biodiversity than what you'll see out in the plains, or what you saw out in Lake Natron. It is the largest unflooded caldera of a volcano in the world. And actually, when you're down here and you see all the animals, and there's lions and elephants, wildebeest, hyenas, you'll notice that they're a little bit bigger. And none of these animals, there's not very many animals migrate in or out of the caldera, because when you start, you'll start at the top of it and then you'll drive down into it, and you'll see the difference of atmosphere and environment. But you'll see things that are a little bit different than what you'll see outside of the area. Next. And then after the Ngorongoro, we'll head out to what is also called the Endless Plains, known as Serengeti National Park. And this is where you will see that the land goes on forever, and you'll see zebra and wildebeest, and you'll see all kinds of animals. And depending on the time of year, you'll see different animals hunting, etc. On the way out to the plains, next slide, please. We will also have a stop at the Oldupai Gorge, which is just inside the park and on the way further out. The Oldupai Gorge is where the Leakey family actually started their anthropology work. And that's where you will actually see some of the first human hominid remains that were discovered back in 1968. And this skull is actually the skull of Twiggy. And that's what they named this one. But you'll see what giraffes look like thousands and thousands of years ago, and just all the different, and how they look different from the animals you'll see out in the plains once you get out there today. And so it's a really interesting stop along our way. It's like a living outdoor museum. So then the Serengeti, and this is what it looks like from a rocky outcrop of it just goes on forever. It looks like the sky goes on forever. It's a beautiful place. And the next couple of slides are just kind of what you'll see out there from different species, from cheetah to giraffe to ostrich. And actually, we'll spend several days out in the Serengeti, and that's kind of the end of our trip. Or you can do the optional extension in Tarangire National Park, which is a little bit smaller park on the way back into the Kilimanjaro area. But Tarangire National Park is really known for its elephant population and its ostrich population, as well as the many birds. It's a really great park. Again, not as crowded as some of the other national parks. It's kind of like a little hidden gem along the way. And so, next slide, please. And so that wraps up our webinar today, and how to plan a meaningful safari and the different destinations that we serve with Global Family Travels.
Thank you, Kelly. I always learn so much from you, and I'm going to actually stop the recording to take time for questions, but we'll be putting this on our website, and Kelly's contact information, or our contact information, will be associated with you. And we are for you to contact us. So, so thank you. Let me just stop, pause.